We're on the 20th page here, Berachot, and we're going to talk about Mussaf. This Gemara will go back to something that we discussed last time. That whole deal of what time is the right time for the Mussaf prayer. The Mishnah said, "V'shel Mussafim kol yom." Technically speaking, the time for davening Mussaf, as we say in Yiddish, is all day. Yeah. Amar Rav Yochanan v'nikra posheya. However, if you have someone who, for whatever reason, decides unintentionally, I have all day. Okay, I'll leave it for all day. Okay, get around to Mussaf sometime much later in the day. Rashi says, "Ha'ma'acher kol kach." Someone who, for whatever reason, intentionally made it that he's going to be davening Mussaf too late. A lot of people have that attitude, by the way, with a lot of mitzvahs. Don't worry about it. As long as I got it in, I discharged my minimal obligation. Rabbi Yochanan says such a person is negligent. He's a posheya. Nowadays, in modern Hebrew, posheya means a criminal. But in this case, it doesn't mean criminal. It means negligence. Oh, I didn't press the share button. Sorry about that. Now we're sharing. Makes it to press share twice. Tanu Rabbanan, Hayulifanav state tefillot. If he had two prayers in front of him, that means right now he has a double obligation. When does this happen? Like we saw last time. Shel mincha, achat shel mincha, achat shel mussaf. It's time for mincha, it's time for mussaf. Means that now it's already early in the afternoon. Mitpalel shel mincha, v'achar mitpalel shel mussaf. We saw this was the halacha. First comes mincha, and now comes mussaf. Reasoning: shazo tedira, v'zo eina tedira. This one is more frequent. That one is less frequent. Everything is tedira to a certain extent. Some are more tedira. Tadir is frequent, and teder means a frequency. Rabbi Yehuda Omer mitpalel shel mussaf, v'achar kach mitpalel shel mincha, shazo miswa overet, v'zo miswa she'eino overet. Rabbi Yehuda, as we saw last time, held that mussaf comes first because mussaf, its time passes, okay, whereas mincha, less time. Rabbi Yehuda felt that mussaf's time is much more limited, up to the 7th hour, like they used to do in the temple. If there was a korban mussaf to be offered by a certain time early in the afternoon, they had already completed it. And the sages hold that really, technically in the temple, they used to have a later mussaf. What we say was the paradigm late mussaf in the temple, something they eventually got rid of, Rosh Chodesh. They used to wait, if it was supposed to be Rosh Chodesh. Today is the 30th day of the outgoing month, so it could go both ways. Could be that the Sanhedrin will declare Rosh Chodesh, and then they'll have to take out a whole load of other animals, 10 more burnt offerings, and the he-goat for a sin offering in honor of Rosh Chodesh. Or it could be that they will not declare today Rosh Chodesh, and tomorrow by default will be Rosh Chodesh. So they said that eventually this created confusion in the temple regarding what song the Levim had to sing. And the Sanhedrin decided that at a certain point they would no longer entertain witnesses to testify as to the new moon. That was a critical step in the process, which means, by the way, if it was really cloudy, they had no witnesses. So by push it off one day. But either way, they made this decision not to do it. So it wasn't the case all the time that they could bring the Mussaf as early as they wanted. Sometimes Mussaf was quite late in the day. But if it's for Shabbos, for example, what's a Mussaf of Shabbos? 2 more lambs. And that could easily be done many times over in the morning of Shabbos. On Shabbos, there's only 1 lamb in the morning. That's the Tamid. And then there's plenty of time to bring just 2 more lambs. It's much easier to offer 2 lambs than it is to offer 7 lambs, 1 ram, and 2 bulls. A lot less work having to be done there. So Rabbi Yehuda felt that because the ideal time for Mussaf is so limited, Mussaf, the prayer, also has a limited time, and it takes precedence over mincha. That's what we saw last time. Rashi says over here, mitpalel shel mincha. He adds, me'achar shegiya zmana kedei lahakdima. Now it's time for mincha. Time has arrived, and now we want to put it first. B'tchilat zmana shelo yikra posheya gam aleha. Why would mincha come first? Let's say temple times, or even right now. Suddenly it's mincha time. You have to daven Mussaf. You didn't do it for whatever reason. Now mincha time shows up. Okay, so mincha takes precedence, but Rashi's adding something here because you want to get in mincha at its right time. Just because now mincha is here, Mussaf I became obligated in the Mussaf prayer before I was obligated to offer this Mincha prayer. So I should take care of the earlier obligation, right? So Rashi says, you already missed Mussaf's ideal time, so maybe you should at least try to get Mincha at its ideal time. Question is, according to Rashi, what is the ideal time for Mincha? Rashi is basically saying that the first possible time for Mincha Gedola, half an hour after noon, is the ideal time. That's Zmana. That's the better time, Tchilat Zmana. And Rambam would tell you, actually, the best time for Mincha would be Mincha Ketana, from 9.5 hours of the day until 10 and 3/4 of an hour of a day. There's a 1 hour and 15-minute window there. And the Vilna Gaon and others would say, well, technically speaking, after Plaga Mincha is best. That's Dimdu Mechama. That's when the sun is reddening in the sky, and there's also ideals then. It corresponds to the Ketores. So different opinions about what is the ideal time for the Mincha prayer. And then it says, V'achar shel Musafim, Rashi adds, Ho'il v'yichir's mana, eino over. Even though he's delayed its time, he has not transgressed anything. The Amri Rabbanan shel Musafim kol yom. Technically speaking, now that he's Mussaf is late, but he's still going to get it in sometime today, so it would work. What is mitzvah overet? Rabbi Yehuda letamei damar ad sheva sha'ot v'tulo. Remember, Rabbi Yehuda is consistent. There, Rabbi Yehuda said that you have until 7 hours of the day to daven Mussaf, and that corresponds to what's in the temple. That's why Rabbi Yehuda would say, yes, get the Mussaf first, because you're going to miss it. The rabbis don't hold to that. The rabbis would say you have another 5 hours. What was that? For what? Yeah, we're going to see that. Technically speaking, there are those who say corresponding with Shachris. It overlaps with Shachris. Others say it should be before Shachris. It should be after Shachris. And there's going to be a nafkamina with regards to perhaps when you could say Kiddush on Shabbos. So stay tuned. Yeah. They usually, everybody would agree, though, that in the temple, for example, if you have a Korban Mussaf means what? Additional. So in addition to what? The Talmud. So usually the Talmud has to come first. Talmud comes first. That's Tadir, Talmud. And then they would do Mussaf. So generally speaking, the sages assume that your Mussaf comes after Shachris, even if their times overlap. There's 2 other Korbanos that have identical times, technically speaking. They are the Talmud of the afternoon and Korban Pesach. Their times overlap. So normally the Talmud is last thing in the afternoon, and then you close up the Beis HaMikdash. But the sages have a drasha there that there's an allowance to actually offer Korban Pesach after the Talmud. Upon that burnt offering, the afternoon burnt offering, that should be the end of it for the day. But they have a special exception. We offer Korban Pesach even after the Korban Talmud. And the way the Rambam has it, it's actually a technical exception. They could have put it beforehand. But in order to save time, I think we discussed this here. They have to clean up in the temple afterwards. So it's better to do Korban Pesach after the Talmud. Okay, let's see. This is going to be a hard to swallow line. Mincha before Mussaf. Once it's the afternoon, you have not daven Mussaf, first finish Mincha. Now the question is this unequivocally the rule? Maybe perhaps there's an exception, even though we hold like the sages. Rabbi would say Mussaf first because Mussaf's time is running out. If you don't hold that Mussaf's time is running out, you really have all day or all the rest of the day to daven Mussaf, just like Mincha, maybe Mincha will always win. But we're going to see that already in the Yerushalmi and in many different circumstances. Other Rishonim have exceptions to this rule. And the only question is, how many of those exceptions were accepted with an A by the decisors? The Gemara continues, Rabbi Zera, ki hava chalish migirsei, Rabbi Zera got tired from his Talmud study. And he's a little bit exhausted. What Talmud study mostly consists of back in the day? Memorization and recitation of Mishnayos, right? They remember, Rabbi Zera's Masechet Berachot didn't have this line, Rabbi Zera ki hava chalish, and he just had the Mishnayos. So it was mostly that. He went and sat. Azul Yativ, Apitcha Devei Rabbi Nosson Bar Tovi. He sat at the doorway to the house of Rabbi Nosson Bar Tovi. That was apparently a gathering place for the scholars. Does Rashi add something here? No, not necessarily there. Amar, why would he go there? He's tired. He's a little bit burnt out from all his study. So what would you do if you were burned out from your study? I don't know, maybe go have lunch. but he went to go sit at the doorway of the rabbi. For what purpose? Amar, he said, Ki chafei Rabbanan, az ekum mikamayhu la'kabel achra. When the rabbis pass by, I will stand for them out of respect, and I will receive reward for doing so. This reminds me, I heard there was one of the brisker type rabbi who wasn't able to study at the time, but he stayed at the Shtiblach. Shtiblach means a minion factory. That way, he could hear Kaddish over again and Baruch over again, and there's schar for doing that. So that's what we felt. Just to at least show respect for the scholars and those and the Torah. Nafak Atha Rabbi Nathan Bar Tovi. And who came out and showed up? Rabbi Nathan Bar Tovi himself. Amar Lei said to him, Man Amar Halacha Be Midrasha. So he asked Rabbi Zera, who was saying halachas in the base medrash? Perhaps someone has a psak there. Amar Lei, he responded, Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Here's what Rabbi Yochanan said. Ein halacha ka Rabbi Yudah, Yamar mitpalel dam shel Mussaf, v'achakach mitpalel shel Mincha. Here it's Rabbi Yochanan's psak we just had, but in the reverse. Rabbi Yochanan in this line over here says, Shel Mincha v'achakach mitpalel shel Mussaf. Mincha first, then Mussaf. And here he says that Rabbi Yochanan says, don't do like Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, Mussaf first, then Mincha. So this is the negation of that. By the way, it leads to the same conclusion. Amar le, Rabbi Yochanan Amara. He says, Rabbi Yochanan said that? Amar le'in, yes, I heard it. Rabbi Yochanan said it. Tanamine arba'in zimnin. I reviewed it from his mouth 40 times. 40 is not bad. Really, you have to do 100 times, right? 101 is even better. So who's the one who actually achieved 101? That's on the go. So he says, 40 times, so I can commit it to memory. Amar le, chadahi lach, o chadat hilach. Let's see what Rashi says here. Is it chadal means is it once? Or this is one time you heard it? Or chadat hilach? Or is it new to you? Okay? It's a play on words. Hada is Aramaic for once or one, and hadath is like chadash in Hebrew. Now, what is he saying? Achad hi lecha shelo lamata davar mishmo shel Rabbi Yochanan elazo bilvad. Is this the one thing you've ever heard from Rabbi Yochanan? And therefore, l'chach chaviva hi lecha, and that's why it's so dear to you. So you've reviewed it 40 times. You at least learned one thing straight from Rabbi Yochanan. You heard this. Is this going to be your quote? Oh, chadashahi lecha. Is it new to you? Shayitha savur she'achad min ha'acherim amara. Because you originally thought that someone else came down with this ruling, but it turns out no, it's Rabbi Yochanan. Turns out there's a chiddush in here. So what was his response? What was Rabbi Zera's response? Amar le chadati. It's new to me. Mishum de misakli be Rabbi Yeshua bar Levi. I had actually I was in doubt a little bit. I thought I heard that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi had said this. Now that Rabbi Yochanan said it, it actually carries a lot more weight. Why? Who is Rabbi Yochanan? The greatest sage of his time. I guess a much younger Talmid of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and also well-known centenarian, had many adventures, and most of the Talmud Yerushalmi is based on what we learned from Rabbi Yochanan. Let's see what the Tosafos say here. A little bit of a technical question. The Tosafos, the first one says, "B'shalom Mussafim kol yom, Iksha Rav Rabbeinu Shimshon Zichrono Livracha." Why is Rabbeinu Shimshon over here mentioned as Zichrono Livracha by the Tosafos? Whoever's composing this. Is Rabbeinu Tam Zichrono Livracha in Tosafos? Good question, right? Well, I think it's a good question. Why have all the Tosafos he's Zichrono Livracha? Well, he had just died, or at the time they were writing a lot of these Tosafos, whoever was putting them down, most of the Baalei Tosafos were alive. Okay? Some of them were alive. At the time he was writing, Rabbeinu Tam says this. That's Rabbeinu Tam. He's alive. But Rabbeinu Shimshon was one of the Tosafos and the contemporary. Yeah, maybe he just died, or it was remarkable that he was one of the first to go. Whatever it may be. Where is this located? Perek Tamid Nishchat. I mentioned this before. This is in Psachim. In Psachim, they're talking about the different times, technically, when they would offer the afternoon lamb. What was the usual time? Mincha Katana. That means they'd start the service at 8.5 hours of the day, 2.5 hours after halachic noon, and it would continue until 9.5 hours. But because of Erev Pesach, they would make it even earlier. The earliest Erev Pesach Korban Tamid was when Erev Pesach was also Erev Shabbos. Why would that be the case? Why would you have to make sure to get in all the korbanos early? Because Shabbos is coming, and you have to get ready for Pesach. Especially when I'm not talking about cleaning the house and getting rid of chametz, I'm talking about roasting the korban Pesach. As long as the korban Pesach was offered, and now you have the meat, you could roast it on Erev Pesach, and you continue roasting it into Yontif. Why? Because you're allowed to cook on Yom Tov. But when your Yom Tov is Shabbos, you need more time to roast it before Shabbos because you cannot roast your Korban Pesach on Shabbos. Yeah,
what would they do like we have this year when Erev Pesach is Shabbat?
Yeah, so the Mishnah continues. In that case, it's even more laid back. They still have to make the Talmud a little bit early because you need more time to get in the Korban Pesach, but everybody would just wait to roast their Korban Pesachs. Not only that, they would actually wait on Har-Bayis. So you had the three groups offering Korban Pesach. One group would head out and take up that spot on Har-Bayis and just wait with their, the body of the Korban Pesach, as it says. And then only once Shabbos was out, 3 stars and everything, would they go to the place where they roast the Korban Pesach. Lamaisa, it means that the Seder started very late, Motzei Shabbos, because can't get ready on Shabbos for what's going to be on Motzei Shabbos. Much like we've had in years past. I'm warning everybody now, God willing, that which we're looking forward to with Korban Pesach is supposed to happen this year. Despite all the setbacks that we suffer every single day, we're not allowed to give up on this. You said L'Shana Haba Yerushalayim last year. I think you said that. I don't know how many people meant it. I'm really beginning to wonder. So if you really meant what you said last year, you have to get ready for Korban Pesach this year, which means that you got to be in Jerusalem before Shabbos because you can't travel. But not only that, you'd only know if they could go through with Korban Pesach. I was telling this to the guys 2 weeks ago. You need to build the Mizbeach. You can't build the Mizbeach on Shabbos. And the Mizbeach is a critical, it is the critical function. Even if the temple is not standing, you can still do Korban Pesach, but you need a Mizbeach. And the Mizbeach needs to be built Erev Shabbos. So we got to get that done. And you'll know if they fail to build the Mizbeach already on the 13th of Nisan, Erev Shabbos, then they will not go through with Korban Pesach the next day because the altar's not there. You can't build an altar. It's Chil Shabbos. Well, yeah. Because the prophets already told us that. Then they didn't. They lost track of it. So now they wrote it down. That was the whole point of Talmud and the Mishnah. We have oral traditions, and when they become weak, what you do is you write it down, and now it's basically frozen. It's the paradox of the biologist. The biologist has at his disposal, samples of flora and fauna. So what can the biologist do to preserve biological samples? Well, he has all sorts of tools. He has preservation tools. He could freeze things. He could photograph things. He can preserve things with chemicals, right? All these different ways. But you know what they all have in common, all these preserving methods? They freeze things exactly as they are, but they also kill them. Okay? You cannot resurrect, resuscitate, revive anything that you've preserved like that. Where we have a Torah Chaim, it's supposed to be living and interpreted by the sages of every generation. Whatever the Sanhedrin says, that's the living Torah. So in order to preserve the Torah as it is, we had to write things down, etch it into stone, freeze it. But the problem is now it doesn't change. It's not alive. Living things change over the course of their lifetimes and they reproduce. They spawn. So it's our job to somehow take this Torah, this Mishnah and Gemara, out of this jar of formaldehyde or out of the cryogenic freeze and bring it back to life. With regards to the location of the altar, there was a point in history where they lost it. So the prophets came and told them, here is where the altar is. But then the Jews kept that tradition and they even wrote it down. There's a whole Masechet that's dedicated to this. Maimonides, who lived 1,000 years after this all went down, also was there, and he recorded his own descriptions of how to find this. The place where the altar is supposed to be is a certain distance from the foundation stone on the Temple Mount. And I've been trying to show people the Temple Mount has been there. The Dome of the Rock was put there because that's our tradition of where the temple is supposed to stand. There is a gigantic foundation stone inside of it, and that's the highest point on the mount. The current level platform that is the center of the Temple Mount is the level of what used to be the temple courtyard. It's still there. And the Mizbeach is somewhere to the west of that. Certain amos, as we know. Yeah. So east to the east of the temple edifice. So there's a huge area. By the way, we're talking about 32 by 32 amos. I don't know. You thinking feet or meters? Yeah. So every amos is like a foot and a half. So you're talking about a space 48 by 48 feet or so, a square. That's huge. Okay. And even if you incorporate different opinions and discussions about how long this amma is, so you could shift on the map somewhere, where is the altar exactly supposed to be? There is, like Rav Goren and others have shown, an area that is certainly, according to all opinions, within that square. It would be a smaller altar, but the altar does not have to be 32 by 32 amos at its base. Don't forget the one they made in the wilderness initially was much smaller. The first temple's altar was also much smaller. So we could do that. That's what they're planning. There is an area that is quite large that is certainly the area of the Mizbeach. That's not a problem today. Have you been to the Temple Mount? Those who know. Those who don't, they just haven't looked. It's a problem. I recommend everybody, if you're here already, you might as well get used to it. Be there at least once. Find out what it's like. And if you're a Kohen or a Levi, you belong there. That's your workplace. You should be in charge there. You should be protecting the place. So yeah. Okay, let's get back to this. Well, no, just a regular. I'm not privileged. So there you go. So so you got to build it before Shabbos. So if they don't succeed in building the Mizbeach before Shabbos, so you know that Pesach will not be happening. Yeah, that day. Where did I put the water? I have it? Oh, here it is. Okay. So what do you ask? It says in Tamid Nishchat, that's a parak in Psachim, talking about the time for offering the Tamid on Erev Pesach. And it says, Mussafim b'sheish, bazichin b'sheva. What's Mussaf at sheish? It says, let's say the Mussaf of Shabbos, that was offered at 6 hours of the day, 11 o'clock, the 6th hour. And the bazichin, what were the bazichin? It's a ceremonial bowl or cup. Really, it depends. The exact shape, what we call it a bowl or cup, depends on the artisan who made them. And they're sitting on the temple with the showbread all week long, and they're full of frankincense. Okay? The Masechet of Livona, frankincense. And before the Kohanim get to eat last week's showbread, they remove the showbread, and Kohanim come in and take these bowls of frankincense and burn them on the outer altar, and they're replaced with new frankincense, just like the breads are immediately placed with a dozen loaves of new showbread. And once they burn the frankincense, then the Kohanim eat the bread. That's basically their Shabbos meal. What? No. They're matzah. They're halachically matzah, but they were not burned. Many korbanos that are eaten have their matir. What's the matir? The thing that is put on the mizbeach and then allows someone to eat the rest of it. So, for example, they talk about the blood. For most korbanos, the kohen applies the blood, however which way. There are many different ways to apply the blood to the altar, and then they go ahead with eating the meat and burning the rest of the korban on the mizbeach. With regards to, let's say, a meal offering that one of us brings, a regular, not a kohen. So the kohen is supposed to take the komets out of that, and the komet itself has a little bit of frankincense also. He scoops some of the flour and the oil and the frankincense, and he burns that on the mizbeach. Then the rest of the meal offering is ready to be made into some form of bread or porridge and eaten by the kohanim. With regards to the showbread, it says that the kohanim are supposed to eat it every Shabbos. They eat last week's bread. So what is the matir? What is that which is first burned on the altar to allow the kohanim to eat this? It is the frankincense. The bowl of frankincense, or the two bowls, that were sitting there all week long with the bread. Where do you get frankincense? Well, they used to get it from India. And I think you could grow it locally. I don't know. Does anybody here grow frankincense anymore? You have some. Well, most of the scents that we have nowadays, yes, people like all sorts of herbal things, but nowadays it's much easier to just get artificial. Okay, so he says here, look at that. Mussaf Yikol Yom, the Mishnaic precedent is that Mussaf was much earlier. Let's put aside Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim's argument over when is time to daven Mussaf. It says here that the Mussaf was when? Musafim b'sheish. That's when you're supposed to offer the Mussaf. The Chitena Hamni Mili the mitzvah. So you're going to say, yeah, that's the mitzvah is to get in Mussaf, daven Mussaf, when they would offer the Mussaf on Shabbos. For example, if you're davening Mussaf on Shabbos, so the best time for Mussaf on Shabbos would be 11 a.m. Aval diavad kol yoma nami zimnehu. Okay, but the diavad, perhaps, all day is the time for offering the Mussaf prayer or the Mussaf korban even in the temple. Harei b'tmura, it says in Masechet Tmura, what? Mashma sha musafim hayunish chatim ima tamid v'nektarini mo. If you look in Tmura, when would they actually offer the tamid? The Mussaf. They would do it alongside the tamid of Shacharis. Okay? So we have a precedent for a very early Mussaf. V'nektarini mo. The teretz also ma'iri b'Shabbos. Yeah, on Shabbos. The teretz that he gives there is dafka on Shabbos, you just have one lamb. But perhaps on other days, when there's a lot more Mussaf, any day that's not Shabbos, the Mussaf is much bigger. It's at least one bull, one ram, and 7 lambs, and he goes for a sin offering. Some days, 2 bulls. And on Sukkot, you double the lambs, and you have a lot more bulls to do. Okay, so it actually depends on the given day. So on Shabbos, you had, that says, the Mussaf was done at 6 in the morning, at 6 hours of the day, because that's when they would burn the bazichin and eat the showbread. But other days, they would offer the Mussaf perhaps as early as possible, or maybe on Shabbos also sometimes. It all depends. There's the b'diavad and there's the chatchila. Not everything they did in the temple is chatchila, and not every time it tells us in the Mishnah what they were doing is it telling us l'chatchila. Maybe it's telling us the more general halacha, the widest window possible. Okay, this is the one that's more practical for us, and going to become discussion of the Rishonim. Here. Halacha mitpalel shel mincha v'archak mitpalel shel musaf. The halacha is, now it's the afternoon, you missed davening musaf, so you know what we're going to do? We're going to ask ourselves a question. What takes precedence now? So the halacha, according to Rabbi Yochanan, is mincha first. You missed musaf in its right time, so now mincha takes precedence. Mikan yesh li zaher. So the Tosfos say that this is, let's say it's unequivocal rule. When should you watch out? B'yom HaKippurim, l'itpalel tfilat shachari kodem sheish sha'ot u'mechetza. You want to finish Shacharis, and whatever is with also the Torah reading, I guess. Shacharis of Yom Kippur could go late. What time did they finish Shacharis here on Yom Kippur? Or what time were they ready to daven Mussaf? Well, there was 2 minyanim. Oh yeah, there's the minyan downstairs? Upstairs. Oh, the 3rd floor. Okay. So what time did they get ready for Mussaf? They put away the Sefer Torah finally. So what time was it of the day?
By 1:30 we were
Finished with Mussaf? Well, they were done with Mussaf? I'm talking about done with Shacharis. Putting away the Torah reading. Huh? Oh, you have to say Yizkor, and the rabbi has to give a sermon. All those are Chok v'Liyavor. Well, it's part of the Indian. Yeah, okay. Or you could do without both. If I were doing this, and that's what I would do, I would just save everything for after Mussaf. Like the Rambam says, first get in the obligations and save everything that's minhag afterwards for the people who can staying around after Mussaf. That way you get Mussaf earlier, and people who are tired and whatever also don't. I found that on Rosh Hashanah, I was telling people, there are many people who, on a regular Shabbos, they're stylishly late. So for them, the fact that they show up to a Rosh Hashanah service and they're there for 3 hours, they'll tell you that's nothing to sneeze at. Yeah, but the service was 6 hours. Yeah, but I was there for 3 hours. Come on. Triple what I do on Shabbos. But the problem is that guy who shows up maybe missed even the beginning of the shofar blowing. He did not be there when they actually said the blessing in the first 30 blasts, which is the main obligation. That's a problem. So what you want to do is, like the Rambam, get in all the obligatory, whatever you got to do. And you could sing piyutim after Mussaf. The Vilna Gaon transposed piyutim to different places because he felt that piyutim don't belong in certain places. And also felt that the Rambam was mostly correct with regards to the timing. And you could save Yizkor for after Mussaf. If you're going to have a break after Mussaf and Mincha, that's when the rabbi could give a sermon and give Yizkor for those who wish. But what are you going to do? The Tosfos are assuming that your sitter is chock full of piyutim. So Shachris, up until Mussaf, takes a long time. So he's saying, Lizaher b'yom ha'kippurim l'tpalel tfilat shachrit kodem sheish sha'ot u'mechza. Get in Shachris, that is, get to the starting point of Mussaf before 6.5 hours of the day. It means the first time to daven mincha. Dainu kodem sheyagia shat mincha, which means before it's actually mincha time. Why? Dim lo came hayut tzrichim l'tpalel tfilat hamincha kodem. If we actually, let's say, I don't know, look in your luach, it so happens that chatzot will be exactly at noon on Yom Kippur, which could be, and Mincha Gedolah will therefore be at 12:30. And now they put away the Sefer Torah, and you have a chazan who's going to say Hineni He'ani, and you have to ask the question, what is Hineni He'ani? Is that something that should be said? There are many who opposed it. And you also have to ask, why is it of all the tefillahs, only the Baal Mussaf says this type of tefillah? This type of tefillah is befitting anybody who is a chazan on the high holy days, correct? Why doesn't the Baal Mariv or the Baal Shachar or the Baal Mincha say this? Anybody else ever asked that question? Okay, well, what? I don't know. So I remember I heard Rav Schechter said that one time he was sort of in this position where they had to, hurry up a little bit. Well, it must be Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. So he told the Chazan to skip that part. Just say Kaddish and start Mussaf like we do on any other Shabbos or holiday. And the Kehillah, that was the 1 year he had a shtel, and the Kehillah revolted. Like, you can't do that. Why? Because back in the day, that was actually a big show. The Chazan started outside the shul, and he would start in a low voice, and he'd come walking out. So because the Chazanim made this into a big deal and with a special tune, people think it's most important, even though in the scale of Judaism, it's like, maybe on that chair. Okay? So it doesn't actually fit, but you can't tell people these things. Either way, we're up to this point. The Tosafos assume that because this is an unequivocal rule, once it's mincha time, Mussaf goes afterwards. The Tosafos are saying that if on Yom Kippur you get actually to, it's mincha gedolah according to the calendar, now we're going to have to say mincha before the Mussaf of Yom Kippur, which would be awkward to be telling people, wait, not to read the Torah, by the way, necessarily. He's telling them, say the Shmona Esrei of Mincha and the Chazaras HaShatz. Then daven Mussaf, and then read the Torah, and then start with Ne'ilah. Okay? Wow, you don't believe that? That's what they're saying. I know, it would tell people to flip back and forth, but what are you going to do? That's what Tosfos is doing. Ri Omer, the Eno Tzarich. No, the rest of Tosfos don't have to worry about this. If it's 12:30 on Yom Kippur, and now they're getting up to daven Mussaf, we don't have to put Mincha first. When the Gemara here says, and Rabbi Yochanan's saying that Mincha takes precedence over Mussaf, Hainu kisheyesh lo la'asot tzrachal. Yeah, when he has some sort of pressing need. Shelo yuchal litpalel tefillah mincha bizmana. For if he were to daven Mussaf first, he wouldn't get in Mincha in proper time. V'tzarich litpalel shnehem miyad. And right now, it's more pressing. Got to do them right now. Kigon. I'll give you an example. Shayelo lelech l'suda gedolah kemo l'nisuin. He's got to get to a wedding, okay? Big wedding party. Umitirarei shema yimshoch b'sudato. He's worried now he's going to be too occupied with this wedding meal. Oh, yishtaker. He'll get drunk. Avayim hayalo shehud palel. If he actually has time to daven properly. Achar tfilat Mussaf tfilat mincha. If there's plenty of time, really it's now just 12:30, and you have another 5.5 hours to daven mincha, so Mussaf would go first. Tosfos is basically overriding what? Rabbi Yochanan. Okay? It's kind of surprising. He continues. Achar tfilat mincha bismana ein lo lakdim tfilat mincha eli pelek aseder Mussaf lachar kach mincha. We just said that Rabbi Yochanan said that halacha according to Chachamim, based on temple precedent, is perhaps Mincha first, then Mussaf. And the Tosfos are saying that if you have your whole day ahead of you, still half the day left, you could still put Mussaf first before Mincha. Right? The only time we said Mincha before Mussaf is when there's some sort of pressing need. Yeah. Yeah, we're talking about the davening. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they've transposed this. They're taking the Kohanim out of the picture. Okay. Now, this very idea, by the way, because I think it actually disconnects the halacha from what was done in the temple, which is why when we first read Rabbi Yochanan's psak, we didn't have room for this. Tosfos are creating a new argument. If I can use that word again, they're reviving Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, saying, well, Rabbi Yehuda felt what he felt because in the temple you have a limited time to daven to offer the Mussaf because they would actually make sure to get a Mussaf at a certain time. So should you. But now that Mussaf has a lot of time, now that Mincha has a lot of time, we reset the whole, the logical playing board here. So Tosfos are saying that Mincha actually can take a backseat to Mussaf because you have so much time left. And the nafkamina they're trying to say is Yom Kippur. Even though you know Mussaf is going to take how long? They're going to start Mussaf now at 12:30. How long will it take to get in everything? 3 hours. I could do it in 2. Okay, and still hit every note. I did it. I was given a challenge once. What? Yeah, I did it. Okay, there was the older guy's like, yeah, I heard every single word. The trick is to pace yourself properly. Okay, don't skip anything. You could do it, but either way, it's going to take 3 hours. But so what? You still have that means you'll start Mincha at 3:30 on Yom Kippur, which is still pretty decent, right? You'll have 2-hour Mincha. So that's what Tosfos are saying. So the question is, how did the poskim feel? Did the poskim go with Tosfos' idea? And by the way, is Tosfos' idea Talmudic? That is, the Talmud seems to say very clearly that Mincha takes precedence because that's what the Chazal said. And now Tosfos is saying, well, Mincha not necessarily Mussaf could take precedence because you have so much time for Mussaf. In Achinami, Tosfos are saying that if somehow you suddenly ask this question, now it's 3:30 in the afternoon, and there are weddings and things like that. So now, yeah, default to the Talmud, Mincha first and Mussaf. But it's a little bit tricky. So let's see what it says in the Tur. The Tur says in Siman Reish Pei Vav. Where is Reish Pei Vav? In which section of halachas? It's in Shabbos. Shulchan Aruch talks about things on Shabbos, just like the Rambam did. But you also have to know, a lot of times that which is discussed concerning Shabbos is also regarding Yom Tov. And with this idea of Mussaf also, Mussaf actually there are weekdays on which we daven Mussaf. What weekdays do we have Mussaf? Rosh Chodesh and Chol Hamoed. Chol Hamoed is actually the big contradiction. It's Chol Hamoed. But either way, we treat it like a weekday. How do you know Chol Hamoed is mostly a weekday? Rabbi Bar-Hayim's proof. What? No, it is. But what? I know you shouldn't do Gezerah D'Rabbanan. But what are people doing outside? Yeah, on Chol Hamoed, if Chol Hamoed was, let's say, the Isser Malacha was a Deraisa, people point out, then you would have seen Gezerahs against it. You would have the basic Deraisa level, and then in order to preserve it, the Siag LaTorah, we'd have Chumras D'Rabbanan on Chol Hamoed. But actually, Chol Hamoed, it's the opposite. You have a lot of leniencies on Chol Hamoed. And the tendency is toward leniency. You don't have someone going to, oh my God, you're holding muktzah on Chol Hamoed. Oh my God, you shouldn't write down a Chol Hamoed. The people, no one's ever asking, should I take a drive to some place? You ever ask a question like that? Is this legitimate to do on Chol Hamoed? Anybody have shilas about that? Can I cook this on Chol Hamoed? No. Most of the shilas don't come on Chol Hamoed for some reason. It's a rare thing. Okay. Zman tefilah Mussaf miyad achar tefilah shachar. What does the Tur say? Someone's asking, what time for Mussaf? According to the Tur, Mussaf on Shabbos is miyad. Shezmana matchil baboker. You asked this question. The Zman for Mussaf starts when? In the morning. Shehu keneged korban Mussaf. It corresponds to the additional korban of Shabbos, which is when? Shezmanu miyad baboker. That's how you read it. First thing in the morning. The Masechet Yoma. What does it say in Masechet Yoma? Oh, good proof. Matzrich pasuk lomar. They actually need a verse to tell us what? Shen nisachim kodmin lemusafim. The verse teaches that the libations come before the Mussaf. That is the libation, the wine offering that accompanies the Tamid, takes precedence over the Mussaf. You need a pasuk to tell you that. What does that mean? The Havamina was, V'im lo yam hapasuk, if not for this verse, Hayu Musafim kisherin l'kadein. You could have said that maybe the Mussaf should go before, should have its offering time before the wine offering that accompanies the very Tamid. So there is what to say. Mussaf almost overlaps with the Tamid. Achagav dichtiv banesachim baboker. Even though it says regarding them baboker, that is the nesech, the wine offering that accompanies the tamid. Says baboker. The musaf could have come before it. Alma de korban musaf zmano miyad baboker. So this is a proof from the Gemara, and the Torah brings it as a halacha that the time for musaf begins when shachris. So really, you woke up in the morning on Shabbos. Yeah, technically speaking, musaf can go first. Why do we have shachris first? Tadir, okay. Therefore, it's best to get it in as soon as possible, immediately after Shachris. Oh, but we read the Torah. So, the Torah reading is part of Shachris. We never really interrupt between the two, so we'll do that. What did Rav Huna say? Damar asur la'adam sheyit om klum koda musafim. Oh, let's bring it now personally. Let's involve our stomachs. Are you allowed to eat before Mussaf? You are? Okay, good. So everybody's assuming that. Rav Huna felt it's usher. Okay? Rav Huna said otherwise. But we hold, how many people actually do this? There are places where, for whatever reason, there's a long Mussaf, they could take a food break. This comes up on Rosh Hashanah. I've never been in a place where they did this, because perhaps you should not be eating before sounding the shofar. That's a different thing. But there are places we've been to that they have a break. They had Shachris on Shabbos, and they had the Torah reading, and then Kiddush. By the way, if you're going to do that, no, I'm talking about just Shabbos. I've never done this. Even though technically, let's just take a Shabbos here. If you're going to stop your Shabbos service after the Torah reading, it's proper then to say Aleinu, at least. Wrap it up. Yeah, what's the question? Yeah. Okay. You also sing well there. Well, they sing low? Okay, well, I thought it was well. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Kiddush Club is a sin. I remember, I don't, it's still wrong. The Chutzlar said they don't, in Chutzlar, unfortunately, they also don't do as many mitzvahs as they do in Israel. I'm not saying anything bad about them, but just if you're there, you cannot do commandments like you can do here. They also leave out the Birkat Kohanim for some reason. I was first taken to Yakar in March 2001 for Kabbalah Shabbos. That's when I was exposed to it. And it turns out my father-in-law's father-in-law used to live around the corner from that synagogue. So on Pesach, 4 years ago now, I davened at a Vasika minyan, and by 9 o'clock in the morning or so, I was taking the kids out to. It was also Sunday morning. It was the first day of Pesach, Sunday morning. I was taking the kids to the park, and we passed Yakar, and they were singing Hallel. So suddenly I stopped. Like, oh, wait, got to hear this. So the kids, but why are you stopping? I want to hear it singing. Can't beat that. Okay, good. Here's what to say about it. Asur l'adam sheitom klum kodam musafim. Whose opinion is that? Rav Huna. Mikol makom tzarich litpalel ota kodem achila. Mussaf should come first, even though technically it doesn't have to. Why? You the Masechet Tanit. It says in the Masechet Tanit. If you look it up, third paragraph, 26th page. Gabe nesiu kapayim shacharit musaf below shchichi bahu shichrut. Why is it that we allow the Kohanim to raise their hands and bless the people at Shachris and at Mussaf? For example, on Shabbos. Well, you're certainly not fasting. If it's a Mussaf day, there's no fasting. Usually, if it's a Mussaf day, there's feasting. But we assume that comes Mussaf time, the Kohanim are able to bless the people. Why? Because they haven't had a drink yet. Kiddush involves, last time I checked, alcohol, usually speaking. It's only nowadays that we have this idea that all year round you could have non-alcoholic grape juice upon which to recite the Kiddush. In the olden days, there was no such thing. The only time you had grape juice was when you squeezed the grapes right before Shabbos from fresh grapes. If it's not the time of year when you have fresh grapes, you do not have grape juice. and your wine is alcoholic, and you need a revius thereof. So someone who said Kiddush is already now disqualified from blessing the people. So it must be that if the Gemara assumes that Kohanim are to be blessing the people at Shachris and at Mussaf, it's because the usual practice is that Kohanim wait until after Mussaf to first recite the Kiddush and drink the wine. Okay? The King Kasav Rabbeinu Chanan al-Hassam. And that's what Rabbeinu Chanan wrote there. Shamina Mikan, Dein Adam Rashai Lechol Ad Achar Tfilat Mussaf, Hilkach Lo Shchiach Ba Shechrut. The Tur felt that you're not supposed to eat before Mussaf. Technically speaking, you have a heter to do so, but it ain't right. So that is why the standard practice is, we don't. If you have it like this, I don't know. You said that there's a place now they have Kiddush. Yeah, so Yakar. They have Kiddush, even before they read the Torah. Oh, grape juice. Okay, fine. So they could do it. Now, Efshar L'Kaim Shnehem. But the ideal is like most people have done, and like the Torah says here. With regards to Mussaf, he says, Mana Kol Yom, Mihu, Mihu. Ikar mitzvata ad sof sheva shod v'asur la'acharah v'chatchila. Zmana kol hayom. You can daven Mussaf all day. The real time is like Rabbi Yehuda said. But what if you do like Rabbi Yochanan? Rabbi Yochanan said, yeah, you have all day long to daven it. But if you don't do it on purpose, l'chatchila, you're a posheya, which means try to follow Rabbi Yochanan. Okay? Until 7 hours, which is why, by the way, the good Haredi Luach tells you, for example, on days when there is a Mussaf prayer, also says, ideally finish Mussaf by this time of day. They'll write it in there. And they'll also tell you what time, make sure to finish Shachris on Yom Kippur. Torah continues. V'im shachach v'lo yitpalel ad shavar kol zmana. Let's say totally missed Mussaf. Katav Rashbam she'ein lo tashlumin. The Rashbam felt that Mussaf has no tashlumin. Missed Mussaf, you missed Mussaf. Apal gav v'vishar tefilot shachach b'chad mehem v'lo yitpalel mashlim ota im tefilah shel achareh. Normally the rule is, somehow you left out one prayer, make it up with the next prayer. That is, next prayer plus 2 minchas to make up for Shachris. Shiny Tfilat Mussaf, Kevin Shemaz Kirbat Mussaf Yom Chakloni Hazeh, Ein Roilat Paleota Ela Bizmana. He felt that because it's talking about the Mussaf, you can't really make it up. But we don't hold this way necessarily. For example, you had a fellow, get this halacha. It is Erev Shabbos and it's Rosh Chodesh. You need to Yalav Yavo. He forgot Yalav Yavo. He didn't say it. Now the sun went down a few minutes after sundown. They're Kabbalah Shabbosing, and now he's in a pickle. He will now have to daven Mariv with everybody. But he has to make up for not missing Mincha entirely, but offering the wrong Mincha prayer, so to speak. So what is the solution? Normally it would be 2 Marivs. You missed Mincha on Wednesday, it was Rosh Chodesh. So there's 2 Marivs that Wednesday night. Is there Yalav Yavo in any of those Marivs? No. Okay? It's so funny. I guess the penalty or the makeup for missing Mincha with Yalav Yavo is another Mariv without Yalav Yavo. So he's going to be offering the Mariv prayer of Shabbos twice. Once because it's Mariv Shabbos, and another Mariv to make up for the Mincha that was done wrong, even though this Mincha is for Shabbos. Sorry, this Mariv is for Shabbos, and it makes no mention of the Yalav Yavo that he missed that caused him to have to offer this second prayer. Make sense? So we're not really so bound by what the Rashbam's saying here. The Rashbam says, how are you supposed to make up Mussaf? Whatever prayer you have afterwards, a Mincha, has nothing to do with Mussaf. What are you supposed to do? We have prayers that make up for a Shabbos, an ordinary Shabbos prayer makes up for a Friday afternoon prayer that's supposed to have Yalav Yavo. Now we're officially in the Rambam side of this year. Not everything here is the Rambam. We're going to discuss the halachas, so we'll have other Rishonim discussing this, and we'll continue with the tour we're discussing. The tour says that V'yesh ba nesiyut kapayim. He's talking about Mussaf of Shabbos. So what do you have at Mussaf? Well,
5 minutes.
yeah.
Okay,
No, this isn't the ikr of what we're doing. This is just a side point. It's where it says at the Mussaf of Shabbos, you're supposed to have the Kohanim bless the people. Now that's significant because the Torah was writing this in what I think the 13th century or so. So he was as Ashkenazic as they come. He's writing this where? In Ashkenaz. And even then, the practice was that on Shabbos at Mussaf, the Kohanim bless the people. Well, okay. Fine. But my question is, around when did Ashkenazim give up on this whole Birkas Kohanim except on Yom Tovim and at Mussaf? When did that happen? Anybody know when to place that? But for many of us, we associate being Ashkenazic or being Chutz La'aretz with that so-called practice. As a matter of fact, that's a funny thing. I remember on the airplane, there was coming to Eretz Yisrael. There's Israelis and they're Americans. Should the Kohen, they made a minyan on the plane. Should there be Birkas Kohanim? Well, they're discussing as though it's a question of location. If you're in Chutz La'aretz, don't bless the people. And if you're Ba'aretz, bless the people. As though that actually matters. Is that a halachic? That's not what? Allowed. And this what? Yeah, it's your El Al, so if it's an El Al flight, they should bless the people. And of course, if you're Sephardic, you're asking yourself, what kind of question is this? That's also the Vilna Gaon says. Basically, when it's recorded in, let's say, the Shulchan Aruch by the Ramah, that we don't have Birkat Kohanim except on Yom Tov and at Mussaf, what is he saying? Who's we? That's a snapshot of history. He's talking about what was in Poland at the time, in the 1500s. But it doesn't mean that forever, if you have a group that descended from them somewhere else in time or in place, that they should continue this practice necessarily. He's just remarking about what the conditions were then. Okay, so we could ask this question, but we could also thank God that this is what was then an orphaned mitzvah, and it was brought back. It's still a surprise, like I said last time. There are places in America where they still don't have Birkat Kohanim every single day, even though the fears that, let's say, Achronim like the Chai Adam had have been shown to be in vain. Okay, let's continue. This is the tour's discussion of the halacha. Two davenings to do. He has to have Mincha and Mussaf. What do you tell him to do? Kagon she'ichar litpalel Mussaf ad sheishaot u'mechza shuzman tefillah mincha. What happened? For whatever reason, he delayed the davening of Mussaf, and now it's earliest Mincha time. What should he do? Tzarich litpalel shel mincha v'achar shel Mussaf. The unequivocal line of the Gemara is what? The psak. Mincha now takes precedence over Mussaf. Okay, that could be a rule all the time. But we saw already who brought up exceptions to this rule. The Tosafists, right on the dot. They said actually this isn't such an ironclad rule. They basically created a wide window for us to say that, for example, you have a situation where Mussaf would still take precedence over Mincha because you have plenty of time. The Torah continues, some say that when we say that Mincha takes precedence over Mussaf, so about when you gotta daven both of them now. Both of them need to be daven now. For example, he wants to start a large meal. Halacha is you can't start a large meal if you have mincha on your hands. Why? For all you know, the meal will take too long, and then you'll miss mincha, right? Or I guess parim. What do they tell you to do? Anybody have a long parim meal? Right? You're going to sit down for a parim meal. 3:00 in the afternoon is going to go on. Next thing you know, it's 6 p.m. and you miss mincha. So what do we do on parim usually? Early mincha, right? Or
Before the Suda. Right?
yeah, before the Suda. But then again, you could have your mincha, your parim Suda in the morning. This year, I checked the calendar. Purim, not for you guys. Okay, Purim for those of us outside Jerusalem is going to be Friday. So, you want to get ready for Shabbos. So we're gonna have a morning Purim meal. But for y'all here in Jerusalem, it's not going to be relevant. You're gonna have your Purim meal on Sunday, so you're gonna have plenty of time. Okay. Thursday night, Friday. Here it will be Friday. That's it. Just Megillah reading Friday, like everybody else. But the Sudan, you're not going to do anything else except your Megillah. No, that's going to be also. Yeah, Parmashulash. Enjoy it. For the third time in 17 years. What? This is the third time in 17 years. You had it in 2008. Yeah. 2008, 2021, and now 2025. Okay. Really? Not really? So okay, we can check. Okay, so he continues. Hilkach kevan shetzarich lipel shteihem shel mincha kodemet shehi tadira v'gam ata ikar zmana. The tour brings up this other opinion. You find it the Tosafist that's saying that maybe mincha only takes precedence in certain circumstances. There's no pressing reason to get in mincha now. No wedding today. He's going to have 5 hours of, I guess his usual Talmud study. Yachol lakdim shel Mussaf, lachar shel mincha ad dimdumei chama. You get daven Mussaf first, and wait until mincha dimdumei chama. Dimdumei chama is toward the end of the day. So the tour said first the unequivocal halacha, mincha precedence over Mussaf, and now he brought the Tosafistic idea that lav dafka only when things are pressing. So what do we do on Yom Kippur? He didn't mention Yom Kippur yet. We'll see that out elsewhere. The Tosafot einan mechalkim. The Tosafos don't make this distinction. They don't. They have a hard and fast rule. Mincha first. Why? Shekatvu sheish lizayer b'yom kippurim shema'acharin filat yotzer ad lachar sheisho mechza. They told us to watch out Yom Kippur. Tfilas yotzer. What's tfilas yotzer? Why is he calling shachris? I saw in Tosfos they mention. I scroll back a little bit. Tosfos is talking about on Yom Kippur lispal tfilas shachris. What does tfilas yotzer mean? Tfilas yotzer means yotzer or barichoshech. It's referring to yes. Well, first it's talking about beginning of the Berachot Kriyas Shema, which precede shachris, but have the piyutim. Traditionally, in Ashkenazic circles, the piyutim, the large set of piyutim that they insert in Berachot Kriyas Shema and the Chazaras Hashatz of Shmon Esrei is called what? Yotzros. Right? That's what you're referring to. So, Tfilas Yotzer. By the way, I have people still familiar with this. I think I've discussed this before. We still have, in let's say, our ArtScroll Machzer, we have all sorts of piyutim to say on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But the old Sidurim are chock full of piyutim for every special Shabbos and every Yom Kippur. People are familiar with those? Arba Parshios and also Shabbos Hagadol, and ArtScroll still has for all the Yom Tovim, although no one says them. So what happened? Very traditional places, basically Yekis and Brits, okay, and other traditional places. Usually in neighboring Kew Gardens Hills, there's like a few shuls they did it, but the Young Israels or other places that are a little bit, even slightly more yeshivish, even if they're not actually yeshivish, they already don't have yotzros for all these occasions. Why not? What happened to them? No. Okay, good reason. Well, what's the main reason also? Well, yeah, it's basically it's a non-Volozhin minhag type of thing. Based on the Vilna Gaon, you don't have to say every piyut, and sometimes the piyuts are actually not there. The Rambam's opinion is no piyut in period. All these yotzros, everything the Ashkenazim have, they should be removed from the siddur. It's not. It's a tircha de tzibur. It also has all sorts of problems. The Rambam would say, just put them in a book or in the museum. Well, the Vilna Gaon was a little bit more tolerant of them, but moved them around. But also knew that not every yotzer fits exactly where the Machzer has it. So from his influence, the piyutim came less and less. And there you go. That's why we're missing a lot of them. So the Tosfos, the Tur says that the Tosfos say that there might not be any room for this allowance. Mincha may be before Mussaf, because the Tosfos said straight up, well, on Yom Kippur, what do you got to get in first? Mussaf. So if you actually hit Mincha time and you haven't started Mussaf, now Mincha will go first. Right? He says, She'akdimu tefillah mincha l'tefillah musafim. The Tosafos, the way they first read this line from Rabbi Yochanan, Brei Halacha is Mincha before Mussaf, no exceptions. The Rambam, Zichrono Levracha, what's the Rambam's opinion? He has a slightly different opinion. Katav, Yesh mi shehora, she'eno sim kein bat tzibur, kidei shelo yit'u. This is a good Rambam. What does it say exactly in the Gemara here? When we were talking about the sources, if you scroll back to the top, who are we talking about? He's a posheah, the person who now has this. What do? Mincha or Mussaf, we're talking about who? A person. We're not talking about a tzibur. The way the Rambam read all these Gemaras is, basically, the tzibur would never get to this situation. The tzibur is like the Kohanim. Did the Kohanim in the Beis HaMikdash ever get to this point where they'd say, Hamid of Mincha or Mussaf? Well, actually, the Sanhedrin was in charge there. They always knew that the order was Hamid, Mussaf, Hamid, right? So too in the synagogues, the order is Shachris, Mussaf, Mincha. And when we're discussing, well, what do we do if Mincha and Mussaf are now overlapping because someone missed Mussaf? We're talking about someone and not some ones. We're not talking about a tzibur. So the Rambam says this rule that Mincha comes before Mussaf is talking about specifically who? A Yachid, which means that if you'd have the case that Tosfos brought up, Shul, for whatever reason, the Rambam wouldn't like that they're davening Shachar so late. The very reason for them having such a late Shachris with such a late end is something the Rambam would not entertain, by the way. Remember, he says no piyutim. But assuming now the Rambam's in Shul with us, and it's Yom Kippur, and it's 12:30 in the afternoon, and it's exactly Mincha time, but now they're only getting ready to start Mussaf, the Rambam would say, in Achinami, Mincha first for the individual, but Mussaf first for the tzibur, because the tzibur is not supposed to change the specific order of the way things are going. It will confuse people. You don't want to get things wrong. By the way, that's actually important. What would happen if we told everybody that now it's supposed to be Mussaf time on Yom Kippur, but flip through your machzor, we're going to daven the Mincha, and the Chazan is going to say the Chazar Shashat for Mincha and not Mussaf. It's going to create a lot of confusion. Therefore, the Rambam says this is Yesh Mi Shehora, and the Rambam doesn't disagree with this. The Rambam brings this is a legitimate concern. If you are dealing with the tzibur, don't change the order of the prayers. The Torah concludes, Vaduni Avi Arash, that's his father, Arash. What do you say? The Chrono Racha, Hayan Noheg, Yom Kippurim, with Palel Tfilat Mussaf Biyachid, Kedei Palel Otab Izmanah. The Rosh was actually a little bit frustrated with what's going on in the shuls. They were basically, what were they doing? They were causing this crisis. They were getting to daven Mussaf right at the time when they should have started davening Mikvah. So what did the Rosh do to avoid this? He davened Mussaf on his own. It wouldn't happen. People get to Mussaf time. Oh, Mussaf or Mincha. The Rosh himself was already, I already davened Mussaf. Okay? I said my Mussaf already. Very strange, but he's supposed to be leading. Okay? How did the Rosh go about doing this? I don't know, but he made sure to daven Mussaf bismana and not get to this conflict. Okay? And even make a yachid. They said about the Vilna Gaon, it used to be everybody takes in Shabbos early in the olden days. Every Shabbos. Why? Because it's dark. You're going to have to wait, stay outside too late. And you want to be able to get home. If you have to walk somewhere to shul, they don't have street lights. You want to make sure you get home while there's still some daylight. If you would wait out, let's say just the sunset, the daven Mariv, Leil Shabbos, it means you're walking home in the dark. But the Vilna Gaon felt that this general rule that we want to first read Kriyas Shema in its time after the stars come out, and then daven Mariv, necessitates davening later. So many times the Vilna Gaon himself was davening Mariv of Shemona Esrei after the minyan, after everybody else. Nowadays, this is very easy, especially in the yeshivas. They will only say Baruch Hu when? Leil Shabbos? I don't know, 20 minutes after the sunset, right? No, it's not so bad. You walk to shul 20 minutes before sunset, you get a long mincha and Kabbalah Shabbos. We've made Kabbalah Shabbos a lot longer than it used to be in the old days, so we can stomach such a thing. This is a yeshivish thing, based on the Vilna Gaon, to have to wait until it's quite dark out to say even Baruch Hu Leil Shabbos, but we can because of technology. But in the old days, it was just the Vilna Gaon himself, but he allowed everybody else to daven Mariv so early. The Beis Yosef here says he's going to discuss what they're doing on Shabbos. He says, the Torah talked about putting away the Sefer Torah and then davening Mussaf. The Beis Yosef adds, Uzman Tfilah Mussaf, Miyad Achar Tfilah Shachar, Shezmanam Achil Baboker. We saw that also, right? That was the Torah's opinion. When are you supposed to daven Mussaf? Miyad Baboker. It's with Shachris. Alma, the Korban Mussaf, is Mano Miyad Baboker. It must be that the Korban Mussaf is, what's its time? First thing in the morning. The Chen Kasvu Tosfos, the Arosh, Rinu Yonah, the Rosh Parak Tfilas Shachar. That's our parak. That's the view they have. Mussaf, first thing in the morning. Then came because of a Rambam, the Perak Gimel Mehilchos Tefillah, Tefillas and Mussafim, Zmana Achar Tefillas Hashachar. The Rambam says, what time is Mussaf time? After Shacharis. Okay? Not delayed after Shacharis, right after Shacharis. The Chos of a Rashba, Barish Perak Tefillas Hashachar, Shenirem Yatosafot, She'im Hikdim Tfilat Mussaf, L'Shel Shacharit, Yatzah. You know that? The answer to your question. According to the Rashba in Tfilas HaShachar, that's the character in Berachot, it seems from the Tosfos that if one were to actually daven Mussaf before Shacharis, he has discharged his obligation. The Chen Kasav, the Sefer Ol Moed Bishmo. And the Sefer Ol Moed also says this. Will be an afkamina. If the person daven Mussaf before Shacharis, and we'd say he has not discharged his obligation, it means after Shacharis, he'd have to daven a regular Mussaf once again. Kamash Malan, according to the Tosfos, because Shacharis and Mussaf time overlap, one who for whatever reason davened Shacharis, Mussaf before Shacharis, has discharged his obligation. Why does this not happen anymore? Have you ever heard of someone under duress? What? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So here's how it goes. This related to the point I was trying to get at. In the olden days, people didn't have Sidurim and Machzorim. Okay? People didn't have such a thing. So there was, nowadays, you don't have anybody who's going to walk into Shiur, wake up on a Shabbos morning, unless he's got something wrong over here already. You're not going to have someone who's going to open up the siddur and daven Mussaf before Shacharis. Correct? Doesn't happen. Ella, but because we're also using Sidurim. What's the question? Because they have an overlap. Yes, Talmud should go first to Chachila, the Diavad. And the Rambam does allow for a case where, let's say they don't have lambs. Okay? The Rambam said, you don't have lambs available. So you go ahead with their korban. The korbanos aren't ma'akiv each other. That is, let's say it's Wednesday and it's also Shavuos. Wednesday and Shavuos. The Shavuos Mussaf is 2 bulls, 1 ram, 7 lambs, and a he-goat for a sin offering. And the korban tamid is 2 lambs. No lambs. What do? So, we have bulls, so we'll bring the 2 bulls that are the korban. We have a ram for the korban. Okay, we can do that. And there's a he-goat. We'll offer the chatos for the day. And then they get a bunch of lambs. Suddenly, a shepherd showed up. He had, a warehouse there in Jerusalem. He has lambs, and they're tubim, and they all fit the right time. So let's start bringing the lambs. Then they'd say, okay, so now we can offer the shacharis lamb. It happened, and it's actually halachas in there in Shas that actually discuss this eventuality. So in the temple, it was conceivable that the Mussaf of a particular day was offered before the Talmud. Yeah? Maybe. So you're there. So the question is now, we've been talking right now the overlap time. The overlap time of Mussaf and Mincha. Shacharis and Mussaf always have an overlap time according to this. So really, if it's just you're not in shul, Shacharis first, and then Mussaf. So maybe, those would entertain that in Achinami, daven Mussaf with everybody else. I was trying to get to the point that because people didn't have Machzorim and Sidurim, some people, it's not that you woke up and you took your siddur out of your Talmud bag and you said everything in order. Someone said his brachos when he woke up at 3 o'clock and he had to do something, and he said Berachot Torah. And he had time afterwards to sit down and say and meditate over Precedes, but he didn't have time to actually say Kriyas Shema and daven because it was still too early for Kriyas Shema and also for daven. And he had to get on his way. And then, sometime or other, he's traveling. He's already flown from Pittsburgh to Los Angeles, and he's landed in Los Angeles in 1:00 in the morning. And this is still before they had printing presses. So now he's going to daven Mussaf. He knows Mussaf. I have to daven Mussaf today because of Rosh Chodesh. Okay, so that used to happen. That people, they didn't have the siddur, so they davened what they knew they had to daven, and it was more conceivable then that someone would have mentioned on a Rosh Chodesh, the Mussaf of Rosh Chodesh davening before Shacharis. That's what you have here. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, what time is it? Yeah. So I'm saying that those would say that yes, you daven Mussaf with the Tefillah B'Tzibur. I think Rabbi Nidal actually wants to give a shir about this. Let's start with you. What is Tefillah B'Tzibur? And what is Chazaras Hashat? Tefillah Tzibur. There's a merit to davening exactly with the Tefillah when they're doing it. So yeah, it might be better to have Mussaf then. And next time don't be so late. Yeah. People feel entitled, by the way. We have to take our davening more serious. It's one thing if you show up to Shacharis on a Shabbos an hour late once, or for whatever reason. But if every single week you're doing that, it means you have the wrong attitude, right? Yeah, or just go to a later minyan. The problem is they make a later minyan, then you're an hour late for that one. So what does it help? I remember I traveled to America about once a year, every year since I made Aliyah, and always that Shabbos, because of the jet lag, I ended up davening at the Chabad house. So Chabad has a 9:30 morning davening. And I think it's really not right. You only miss Yeshua. His mom's is also not ideal. And I'm thinking, so I have an excuse. I'm jet lagged. I landed Wednesday evening. What's everybody else's excuse? Is everybody we're all on the same flight or something? Okay. So yeah, what are you gonna do? Okay. He continues. Umasha kasav kigon sheicher lifpala Mussaf ad Shilo to mechza. When the tour mentioned, you have a fellow who's, for whatever reason, no Mussaf and now got to Mincha time. Who could differ at Tosfos Sham? He's fine with the Tosfos say. The Chen Kasav Arash, the Mashma Talmuda Didon. According to our Talmud, what does our Talmud say? That Mincha, Mussaf, which wins? Mincha. That's the straight understanding of our Gemara, Talmuda Didon. When they say Talmuda Didon, who are they referring to? Who's us? Talmuda Didon means Ha Talmud Shelanu. Who's Lanu? He's referring to what we call the Talmud Bavli. Udlo Yerushalmi. It doesn't fit with Yerushalmi. Oh, who mentioned Yerushalmi? What does Yerushalmi say about this question? Shekasvu Ariva Arash, the lo amrina mitpalel shel mincha tefila, ella kishichar ad zman mincha ketana. According to the way the Russian others understood Yerushalmi, which we will see forthwith, this whole rule about mincha taking precedence over Mussaf is when, in which circumstance? Yichar adzman mincha ketana, not mincha gedola, like we've been discussing until this point in our Babylonian Talmud. Mincha ketana, 3:30 in the afternoon, 9.5 hours of the day. Aval kodem lachem yitpalel shel musafim tchila. The Beis Yosef brings an opinion that says, based on the Yerushalmi, this whole mincha taking precedence over Mussaf is only the latter half of the afternoon. The last 2.5 hours of the afternoon. Remember, this last year was here. We discussed this. Mincha Katana is when there's 2.5 hours of the day left before sundown. That's, according to many, the ideal time for Mincha. That's when they would offer the Korban Tamid in the temple on a normal day. And that is when you have overlap between Mussaf and Mincha now. Now Mincha takes precedence. But the first 2 hours before that, at the beginning of the afternoon, Mussaf still takes precedence. Now my question is this really what Yerushalmi says? Anybody know? Anybody here a Yerushalmi Bucky? What? You're pointing to something. Rabbi Safran? Oh, okay. So I'll read you what the Yerushalmi says. Let's see if the Yerushalmi, tell me if the Yerushalmi says exactly what they say the Yerushalmi says. This is the girsa we got from Machon Mamre. It's very important. The problem is Yerushalmi wasn't studied as much. So Yerushalmis have harder girsas. It's more obscure, less people studying it, more obscure, and less people using it for halachic psak. Although who like to use the Yerushalmi in a lot? The source, the Don equates Yerushalmi. Sorry, the Rambam equates Yerushalmi with the Bavli. He doesn't say either one takes precedence. People read it wrong. He says we all accepted the Talmud Bavli. That's the line in the Rambam. But by that he means as opposed to anything that came after the Bavli. So Masechet Sofrim or things like that doesn't bind Am Yisrael. But the Bavli was the last thing that's universally binding. But earlier he said that he actually derived halacha equally from Yerushalmi and Bavli. And that's why you have, here and there, the Rambam actually following the Yerushalmi over the Bavli. And then you get the Ravid saying to the Rambam, the Rambam doesn't go far enough in following Yerushalmi. This writer, he says he follows Yerushalmi, but he doesn't take in every Yerushalmi. For example, we have here in Hilchos Kriyas Shema, the Ravid accuses the Rambam of not being 100% consistent with always going with Yerushalmi. Okay, so you can find that there. Here, let me see here. Okay. No, I don't have it. I should have marked it over there. The Vilna Gaon also basically follows the Rambam. The Vilna Gaon says, for example, that the Rambam often would follow the Yerushalmi over the Bavli, and the Vilna Gaon agrees. You find these places. Why is the Vilna Gaon telling you? And by the way, just he'll bring up, Shulchan Aruch says this, but the Rambam said this, and that follows Yerushalmi. What was the Vilna Gaon doing? Endorsing the Yerushalmi over the Bavli, especially in Zroyim. That's the Vilna Gaon's area. I'll read you what the Ravid says here. Amar Avraham, Zeh Mechaber. The Rambam ever did the Ravid ever refer to the Rambam with honorifics? No, and sometimes even knocks him. He says this author, Darko Liot Somech Al HaYerushalmi. The Rambam usually relies on the Yerushalmi, right? V'chan Lo Samach, but here he did not rely on the Yerushalmi. V'sham Amru, and here doesn't you know the Yerushalmi says X, Y, and Z. Okay, so let's see what it says in Yerushalmi. Rabbi Chia b'shem Rabbi Yochanan. Ooh, Rabbi Chia's reporting Rabbi Yochanan said. Rabbi Yochanan is the one who gave us the Pesach in the Bavli. The Bavli has what Rabbi Yochanan said regarding what? Once again, Mincha takes precedence over Mussaf. That's what you have in the Bavli. The way the Tosfos understood it, all the time. The second Mincha time hits, the earliest Mincha, now Mincha takes precedence over the Mussaf. And the Rambam said, yeah, by the way, that's for an individual, perhaps not for a tzibur. Here it says, Tfilad Mincha u'Tfilad Musafim, Tfilad Mincha kodemet. I put this in blue. This is the straight opinion. Rabbi Yochanan says, I have a choice between the two. What takes precedence, Mincha or Mussaf? Yes. Someone tell me, Mincha or Mussaf, what takes precedence according to Rabbi Yochanan? Mincha. Havun ba'un memar. What's havun ba'un memar? Let's translate the Palestinian Aramaic. It means hayu sheratzu lomar. Okay? They wanted to say, this is a havomino, what we call in the Bavli a havomino. There are those who wanted to say, what? Kishe'ein bayom k'dei litpel shteihem. When does Mincha take precedence over Mussaf? When there isn't enough time left in the day for both of them. Aval yesh bayom k'dei litpel shteihem, tfilat Mussaf kodemet. This is the line. The Mussaf takes precedence. If there's only time for one, which takes precedence? Well, it says Tfilat Mussaf kodemet. That's put in red. And Rabbi Zera b'shem Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Zera. Now we have Rabbi Zera says in Rabbi Yochanan's name, Afilu yesh bayom k'dei litpalel shneihem Tfilat mincha kodemet. No, even if you have enough time in the day to say both, Mincha still takes precedence over Mussaf. What? Egg? What do you mean? Sometimes you're late. You missed Mussaf for whatever reason. It's now Mincha time, so Mincha takes precedence. Rabbi Nassan Bar Tovia b'shem Rabbi Yochanan, he also says, Afilu yesh bayom k'dei lepil shneihem filada mincha kodemet. Even if you have enough, not a lot of time left in the day, you have to choose one. What takes precedence, Mincha or Mussaf? Mincha takes precedence. Rabbi Yochanan's rule stays. They have a kasha. V'atani hikdim tefillah mincha l'tefillah musafim yatsa. We have a brisa that says that if one daven mincha before Mussaf, he has discharged his obligation. Mashma what? Mincha went first before Mussaf. Okay, that's also fine. What's the implication? The shavar. That's saying already. But l'chadchila, what should take precedence according to this brisa? Mussaf should take precedence. Ha b'tchila lo b'da. Maybe l'chadchila, you shouldn't do it this way. And the answer is patar la. They answered v'shelo igia zman atfila kehada. Lo igia zman atfila. Yes, if a person somehow daven mincha a little bit too early, lo igia zman mincha. Now mincha before Mussaf, he's yotzei. What's the example? Like Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Mifkad l'talmidav, that he told his students, he gave them an order. In avilichon ariston, if you have an aristo, well, we're not talking about Aristotle. Ariston is a name, it's a Greek name, but it's also a noun. It's not a name sometimes. What's an ariston? Okay, Greek for big meal. Okay, Suda Gedola or a Mishnah. So that's why you even had Jews mentioned in the Mishnayos who have the name Aristo or Aristo. Okay, name a Jewish name like Alexander. Umata Yoma Lishit Sha'in, and now it's already 6 hours of the day. 6 hours of the day has arrived. You have a meal coming up, Purim or a wedding or something. The lotus kula riston, okay? Before ad the lotus kula riston, before you sit down to the meal, tevun matslun de minchata ad the lotus kon. Mincha should come first. So earlier mincha. Either way, is this Rishalmi? What's it trying to say here? What do you and I get from this Rishalmi? What takes precedence, mincha or Mussaf? Unequivocally, it's mincha. That's why I put in the blue. The opening line is mincha over Mussaf. Mincha takes precedence over Mussaf, but we had two Havaminas here that would say, no, sometimes Mussaf is earlier, take precedence over mincha. I find it funny over here, maybe I'm mistaken, but this Yerushalmi that the Beis Yosef mentions that others use as perhaps a precedent that mincha only takes precedence over Mussaf late in the day is just a Havamina in the Yerushalmi, but is rejected by the halacha. Now, it's not inconceivable that there will be ideas in the Yerushalmi that are perhaps taken out of context or not quoted exactly by later authorities. Remember, the Yerushalmi is more obscure. My point here is, when we find that this idea in the Beis Yosef, that mincha only takes precedence over Mussaf when you're already late in the day, perhaps is just a Havamina in the Yerushalmi. There was a Chafidim, for example, just a Havamina. What do? They had a yurtzeit of some sort. A reason not to say Tachanun today. Not that there are people where I was today, they didn't say Tachanun for whatever reason. You know that? Well, not the Rambam's yurtzeit. Rabbi Yaakov Abu Chatzer's yurtzeit, the Baba Sali's. They named the yeshuva after him, so somehow his yurtzeit is a no Tachanun day. This is a very non-Maimonidean, non-Litvish idea that it's a yurtzeit of someone, therefore no Tachanun. It does not follow. Why should we not say Tachanun on a given day? Because it's a happy day. It's a Shabbos or a festival. But on a day that's not a Shabbos or a festival, we do want to offer additional supplications. That's what Tachanun is all about. They leave it off. So the fellow was joking that these Hasidim, they don't say Tachanun that day. Why? But Kamash Malon, we do say Tachanun. No, but there's a Havamina not to say Tachanun. Even there's a Havamina not to say Tachanun, so they will leave out Tachanun. Okay? Or they have a special guest. I remember there was one guy telling me that they didn't say Tachanun in this shul in Brooklyn every Friday and Sunday. Friday because they're Shabbos, and Sunday because of Moshe Shabbos. And also other days they came up with other excuses, no Tachanun. One day they couldn't find an excuse. They had to say Tachanun. Rabbi said, oh, we have a special guest, Tachanun. In his honor, we won't say Tachanun. Okay? Well, yeah, it's kind of strange. Okay, well, I'd say you should really. I just drank a cup of water, but perhaps we should be fasting today. There's a good argument to be made that we should be fasting today and Thursday. Yeah, this is not. We're in a terrible situation, by the way. Things have only gotten worse. Okay? Think about it. They're telling me there's supposed to be a new American president today. Last week, the current president, the Machon, and the future president, God save us, what were they saying? They were arguing over who can take the blame for imposing this surrender on the state of Israel. Okay? They were arguing over who's to blame for such a thing. They want credit. Like who facilitated the most Auschwitz. So we have a problem. Okay? No one is your friend, and they're continuing to show you that day in and day out. So watch out. We're at war. The war is not over. It's just going to get worse because if you reestablish your enemy and you give him back all his faculties and all his supplies and everything he needs to continue killing you just like he said he would, he will do so. Also, I recommend everybody, even though people here are getting a little bit older than me, it's still important that you should be armed at all times, because a lot of official bodies are not there going to protect you. Even though they might have the ability to do so, they have already shown you that they will not do so. Okay, let's continue. The Torah said there is an exception sometimes. Mincha doesn't take precedence over Mussaf. Ken kasav atosos v'arash b'shem hari. Zed das Rabbi Yonah v'Rashba. You always find these das. There's some who say that the whole mincha over Mussaf. Sometimes there's exceptions. Yes, we saw them. The Rashba says, Mistabra, Shim avar v'kdim tefillah musafim tefillah mincha. If someone, for whatever reason, had Mussaf before mincha, v'afilu b'makom sheish lo tefillah tefillah mincha, he had time to daven mincha, but Mussaf came first, whatever it was. Yatsa, he still discharged the obligation. He doesn't have to offer a second Mussaf now. Mishum de Musafim kol shata zmanehu, because it doesn't matter when he actually davened Mussaf, practically speaking. It was an all-day prayer. Tefillah Musafim kol hayom, tefillah Musafim all day long. Ela d'chatchila tzarich lachtim tefillah mincha. L'chatchila mincha takes precedence, but b'diavad didn't matter. And that's the end of the quote. And Tosfos, Tosfos said, great rule, mincha always before Mussaf, once you get to this time. So what does the Shulchan Aruch say? The Shulchan Aruch says what we would have anticipated the Shulchan Aruch to say, but the Vilna Gaon has a surprise for us somewhere in there. Okay? I didn't put the actual words of the Vilna Gaon. He says, go see a different simon. So I'm going to read you what it says in Reish Tevav, Hilchos Shabbos in the Shulchan Aruch. He says, Hayu lifanav shtei tefilot achat shel mincha v'achat shel musafim gon sheichar b'yitpalel tefilat musaf ad sheish shaot umechza. It's come time on Shabbos. He's late with Mussaf. Now it's Mincha time. What comes first? Mincha or Mussaf? Someone tell me. He's been following long enough and still with us. Okay? Shuzman tefilat mincha tzarich litpalel shel mincha tefilah v'achar kach shel musaf. Mincha now takes precedence over Mussaf. That's what Shulchan Aruch says. But the Ramah says, Umihu imikim shel Mussaf yatzaf. If you daven Mussaf first, he still discharges the obligation. Then the Shulchan Aruch brings the other opinion, which says, Yesh omrim dainu davka kishetzarich atol litpalel shtehen kigon sherotzeh lecho v'asur lo lecho ad sheyitpalel mincha. V'aymeino tzarich atol litpalel mincha yachol lakdim shel Mussaf. The big exception that we first saw in some Tosafos that, technically speaking, maybe Mincha won't take precedence. Why? Because he's not in a rush. He doesn't have to start a meal. He already had a Shabbos meal. For whatever reason, there's nothing pushing him. And the Ramah adds, the Ramah adds that if it's Mincha Katana time already, certainly Mincha takes precedence. There are those who said, no, Mincha only takes precedence once you got to Mincha Katana time. And the Yesh Rash, Enosim came to Tzibur, Lachim Tfilat Mincha, Tfilat Mussaf, Kadeshan Lo Yitu. Here's the Rambam's opinion. The Rambam says we don't change the order of the davenings when we're dealing with a tzibur, but a yachid would be something else. The Vilna Gaon says at the end of this, see what it says in the laws of Yom Kippur, Kaf Reish Kaf, what the real halacha is. What does it say in Yom Kippur? What do we learn from Yom Kippur? I'll read you what the Torah says there. V'tov l'katzer b'fiyutim u'b'slichot shacharit k'dei l'maher ba'inyan she'palel Mussaf kodem sheva sha'ot. Have you ever heard someone do this? Tov lechatzer b'fiyutim u'v'slichot shachari k'dei l'maher binyan she'palel Mussaf kodem sheva sha'ot. I don't know what time they started here on Yom Kippur, the davening. However, the Torah said that you could actually cut out some of the slichos and piyutim in order to make sure that you daven Mussaf before 7 hours of the day. And by the way, is he talking about the start time or the finish time? No, he's talking about the finish time. Okay? How long did it take him to actually offer the Korban Mussaf on any given day in the temple? Shorter than it takes us to, for example, daven Mussaf on Yom Kippur. So he's saying here, not only do you want to start Mussaf by a certain point, you also want to end Mussaf at a certain point. You don't want your Mussaf to go too late, although we're more makbid for the starting point, as you might have seen. They're saying here, Because Shacharis has too many piyutim and slichas, you can the katser, okay, cut some out in order to make sure that Mussaf gets in at the right time. I was always wondering about this. There was a yeshiva in my neighborhood when I was growing up that they had a long Shacharis and a long Mussaf, really long. And I'm thinking at the expense of Mincha, which means they're starting Mincha and the Elo late in the day. I don't think they had their timings balanced. It was almost a joke. On Rosh Hashanah, for example, they would finish davening at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, that's a little bit extreme, but it's not unheard of. And same thing on Yom Kippur. You might have noticed, by the way, that your Yom Kippur Machzer, what's the difference between according to Halacha, what's the difference between the Shachris Amidah and the Mincha Amidah on Yom Kippur? What is the difference? No, what's the difference? Halachically speaking, there is no difference. The words are exactly the same. The texts are exactly the same, ideally. There is no halachic difference between the Amidah of Yom Kippur of Shachris and of Mincha. What about the Chazar Sashatz? Is there supposed to be a halachic difference? Is there any actual halachic difference between the two? Oh, so I have a question. According to the Rambam and the Gaonim, they are the same. Okay? The Shachris equals Mincha on Yom Kippur. So why is it our Shachris Chazar Sashatz is so much longer? Yeah, because of the piyutim. Why did they put all the piyutim in Shachris and Mussaf and have just like one or two in Mincha? Well, you think that was intentional? It's just it's a Shilo here. Technically speaking, you could do if you want to be a purist and you want to follow the tour, take some of those piyutim from Shachris and put them in at Mincha. There's halachically no actual difference. So what happens to the precedence of the printers or whoever wrote the piyutim? Also, the fact that our piyutim are there exactly where they are in the Machzer, is that halacha l'Moshe Sinai? No. Who decided? Exactly. Okay. Fine. Well, a lot of things were actually decided by the Chazonim. Okay? The Chazonim who composed the tunes and also, like we said before, the whole ceremonial aspect of how these things are done are decided by Chazonim. For example, one major part. Who's here says Brich Shtei when they take up the Sefer Torah? On weekdays or on Shabbos? You have in your sitter, right? Anybody here say it religiously? Make sure to say every single word. Well, okay, but if you could, okay, how did Brich Shmei become so popular? Before the 20th century, it was barely in the Sidurim. How did it make its way into the Sidurim so much? There were already people like Rabbi Soloveitchik who felt you should not be saying it, period. And it wasn't in the old Sidurim. Where did it come from? Well, it says in the Zohar, this is what you're supposed to say when they open it up. The Spartan, they don't even say it most times. They don't say it on Shabbos, for example, or on weekdays. Each place has a minhag. They don't have it by default.